Hey, common scientists, we're coming to you this week with the topic of microexpressions. So, we'll hear a little bit about what that means, where it came from, and some of the theory, some of the controversy as well. But at a very basic level, I'll just kick it off in saying that microexpressions are just facial expressions, but they are a basic 7 facial expressions that have been thought to potentially be universal, meaning that I might be able to tell when anyone around the world is feeling happy or not if I could see a picture of their face at that moment. And so I'll kick it to Aidan to explain a little bit about what those different micro expressions are, and then we'll get into a bit about the science and maybe the fake news of micro expressions.
Yeah, so to speak on microexpressions briefly, so a microexpression is an involuntary response to a thought process and internal emotion. And the word micro, or the prefix micro in the word, means small, and so they're said to last 20 milliseconds to about half a second. And Dr. Paul Ekman is the researcher who popularized the idea, and he found these generalities in facial expressions around the world. So I think he was in Papua New Guinea doing some research, and he started to formulate his theory of these micro expressions being universal across humans, and they can be generated, uh, he said, in two different ways. So there's either they can be intentional, so they can be. So the tension with micro expressions that he talks about is that there are these micro expressions that occur where the emotion doesn't quite match what you're saying, and so they can come through uh, intentionally through conscious suppression, where you are suppressing your emotions and saying another thing, or it can be unconscious repression, where it's unintentional and you're just not aware that you're of your emotions enough to actually identify them and say them out loud. But the 7 emotions are anger, fear, happiness, contempt, surprise, sadness, and disgust. And there's different uh, pieces of the face that he associates with these different emotions. Happiness is a smile with wrinkles around the eyes, and yeah, there's different traits to these different emotions that I don't think I'll elaborate here for our audio listeners. They won't gain much value from that, but yeah, you can do your common science research and look up videos on that. There's plenty of good resources on YouTube that we can link that go through the different emotions and the different characteristics of them. But yeah, that's kind of a super brief overview on them. I'm pretty
Yeah,
new to the subject.
no, thanks for sharing. That was perfect. And as Aiden said, for the audio listeners, if you want to skip ahead a minute or so, that's fine. But I'm going to put the boys on the spot and humiliate all of us on camera. So we're also on YouTube. You can check this out. But I really think it would be fun for each of us to do our best impression of each of these 7 emotions.
Okay, the emotion, so not a micro expression, just showing the emotion.
Well, do our best to show like what we think of when we think anger,
Okay.
and then fear.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
At the viewers.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's give our best. You can't be laughing. Neither can I. Okay, our best anger to our viewers. I tried.
Maybe we do 3
Okay.
for our audio
Okay.
listeners' sake.
Okay,
I
anger.
was looking very angry.
Well, let's just do it just one more time. Anger. Okay. Now let's do disgust. Okay. Aiden, you pick the last one.
Let's do fear.
Okay, we're done. We're done.
Alright.
But it was good. It was good.
Yeah. We should. Yeah.
So I'll be fascinated to go back and watch our faces
Yeah.
to see how
Me too.
similar.
I don't know. I'm not very good with that type of stuff, so I might like be doing. I might have been doing surprise when I was supposed to do
Yeah.
here. I don't know what I was up to, so it'll be interesting to see.
Right, yeah. So in some of my preliminary research, and I mean for our viewers and for our listeners, in some of my preliminary research, I was reading that being able or having the ability to read microexpressions really well can aid in almost any career situation that you're in. And I would bet then that being able to display emotion correctly, whatever that means, we'll get into that,
Yeah.
could probably also add value. And I think both Aidan and Jay are quite stoic. I would maybe say more so than myself in your display of emotion. And yeah, so it'll just be fascinating. You guys will have to let us know if our stink face looked right or wrong.
Yeah, I think like people who are, I mean, I can't speak for you, but we are both pretty stoic and like kind of have like a sober sense to us. But at least for me, it does sometimes, even if I feel an emotion, I don't always express it. And sometimes, like even if I want to express it,
Yeah.
and sometimes when like I try to express it, I feel like it comes off a little weird because I'm like, because a lot of times I will be angry, but I usually, like you said, we're kind of stoic, so we usually don't express a lot of our emotions. So sometimes when I actually do want to show some sort of like joy or this, I feel like it comes off awkward sometimes. I'm like, oh man, like all this stoicism is maybe like an awkward human being that can't even really show you that I'm disgusted or this or that or whatever. It's really weird.
That's funny. Yeah, I can. I mean, thinking about the stoic and the awkwardness, I think it. I think there's some truth in it, and I realize it too when I might be trying to make a face for a podcast or put some sort of intonation in my voice, because yeah, that's definitely how I mean, a life philosophy that I've been working hard at incorporating into my daily practices, and I think that it does reflect then in my emotional expressions.
Yeah. Did you guys take any of like the micro expression test, like where you try to like do the guesses and everything? How'd you do?
I did very well. I think I mixed up to either like I think disgust and contempt I might have mixed up.
Yeah.
Mm.
Because contempt is kind of
pretty
like a
well.
mixture of like anger and disgust.
Yeah.
Because you're like you're upset with something, but you're also like you're looking down upon it, and like disgust is kind of like you're looking down upon something.
Yeah,
That's interesting. Yeah, I sucked at it. Like I was
Yeah.
so bad at like deciphering micro expressions. I was all over the board. I was like, all right, I'm horrible.
Yeah.
that's funny. Yeah, I didn't end up taking it, but yeah, what was it like for our listeners, or like what were the tests like? It was just faces.
Yeah, it was like there was like either videos or images that they would show, and sometimes it would be like I did a couple different ones. Some of them would be micro expressions where they happen really quickly, and those are obviously even harder because only like 50% of the average people or something are even very good at it. You can train yourself to do it, but or take Paul Ekman stuff. I don't know, but I'm not gonna plug him. No free press in here. But then there was also some that I did that were just like facial expressions in general, where some people were just doing different types of surprise faces and this, and some of them I was like, yeah, I guess that's what. I don't know. I just I mix them up sometimes. Is all I'm saying. I don't know humans. That's what I'm saying.
Rating emotions is absolutely challenging, and as I'm sure we'll divulge, facial expressions don't always reflect feelings very well. And often, I think, too, people struggle to put words to their feelings. And so maybe someone is actually feeling disgust and their face might show disgust, but they might actually misidentify their own emotion, right? And say like, no, I was scared, or I was whatever it is. So super complex sort of issue. But the basics of microexpressions, as Aidan had said, just to kind of recap, is kind of a theory that there is a brief involuntary facial movement that displays one of these 7 emotions: anger, fear, happiness, contempt, surprise, sadness, and disgust. And the research has been largely popularized in the last 50 years or so, I want to say.
Yeah, I think that's about right.
Something like that. And so much so that it was thought that there were universal emotions. It is still thought in different schools of thought. Thought in different schools of thought. And has been implemented into some of our technology. So kind of a crazy evolution of research.
Yeah, a crazy evolution of research. My inclination, or my first reaction, is that there's got to be some truth to it, and for me it makes intuitive sense, especially when it comes to this idea of a microexpression, and then occurring in the instance that you might be betraying your true emotion. We're having a technical difficulty, but I'll keep expounding on my thoughts as Lauren and Dre figure out how to get the microphone stand back together. But I think that this idea of having an immediate, you feel an emotion, which is a reaction to an external stimulus, and that emotion is then briefly portrayed, but then there's some sort of suppression of it after the fact, that interruption of the expression of the emotion. Because I would think if you were not going to betray that emotion, you would just then express anger fully, your facial expression would then express it fully, but rather there's this interruption of it by either this conscious or unconscious suppression. It makes a lot of intuitive sense, and that's probably why the microexpressions theory, or whatever it's defined as. I'm not sure if it's considered a theory or what it's technically considered, but it makes a lot of intuitive sense to me why many people would latch onto it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think too, in my research, we probably latched onto it a bit because of the name attached to some of the beginning foundations of the theory, or of the idea, and that is Mr. Charles Darwin, who was an icon in science, right? And is an icon in science, but he's no longer with us, so rip Charles Darwin. And it was thought that this original theory of microexpressions, was surmised by Charles Darwin. Did I use that word right?
A surmise is to deduce.
Well,
was
yeah.
He it's thought that he he provided a seed of the idea, right? Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah. But anyways, so people thought that he was the first person to promote the idea that microexpressions were a thing. And then it was, of course, taken by Paul Ekman, and now has grown largely. And some of the controversy that I understand is that Charles Darwin thought that there may be universal emotions, but only really talked about being able to tell if someone was experiencing something positive versus negative, and didn't really go into 7 different discrete emotions.
Right.
And didn't even actually call them emotions. So I think shows a good example of how you can take one researcher's work and understand it and refine it, and then do your own research that's meant to build on it, but it may take it in a whole new direction because of a way you might have perceived the original research. So that was something fascinating that I saw in my own common science research. But still, depending on the site that you find in your own research, you will see some people saying like, yes, Charles Darwin, the pioneer of microexpressions, and others saying like, he planted a seed that thought about emotion being more positive or negative, and that we would be able to see that, but nothing near what like the Ekman group it is or was promoting several years ago.
Yeah, I think the idea of at the very least, the positive or negative through the lens of evolution uh, makes a lot of sense. And I think about these 7 specific emotions, and it's like anger. Well, that's in my eyes expressed when there's something that you don't want to continue occurring, and so that would be a negative emotion. And then like fear would be more negative because you're afraid of some external, and you want to get away from it or resolve it. And so in the very least, through this lens of like wanting to survive, it would make sense why there would be some universality of this like positive and negative emotions.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. And I think too, this might go back to the language cast a bit, but that there's a lot of ambiguity in the words that we use to talk about things. And I'll just read this little snippet from an article called "The Psychology of Facial Expressions" that gave a good history of the coming up with, or like the birth of this idea. And it says, according to Darwin, among the best recognized expressions are those of low spirits, in quotes, and those of high spirits, in quotes. Darwin's rather vague notions of state of mind, in quotes, and of high versus low spirits could be taken to prefigure a dimensional at least as much as a categorical approach to emotion. So I think that highlights too, just the ambiguity of language and of topics like emotion. And I mean, high spirits versus low spirits is quite vague. But I do think what you said, Aidan, too, makes a lot of sense, that evolutionarily it would be advantageous for people within a human population to understand that person looks freaked out and like super scared and is running. Maybe I should also be freaked out and run because like it might be advantageous to my survival.
Right. Yeah, and thinking about the micro expressions too, like even if that person might be suppressing their emotion or unaware of their emotion, they still might, like if micro expressions are real, they still might be then communicating that emotion to the person, and then that person might be more likely to act in their interests, from an evolutionary perspective. But yeah, it is like harkening back to the language cast. It does feel sometimes a little arbitrary where you draw the 7 dimensions, and but yeah, any thoughts on your end, Dre?
Is there somebody that's saying that they're not real? Or are they just saying that they cannot be relied upon?
I think, Lauren, you're more aware.
Yeah,
that was my understanding from your conversation.
Yeah, I think a bit of both, that there may be some universal emotions, but that relying on the face to understand those emotions is not the way to reliably do it, and that it may not even be possible to reliably measure emotions. And I think too, some of the physiology behind that points me in that direction of thought, because the human face has 43 muscles that can contort, lift, stretch into dozens of expressions, right? We see people talk and their face changes all the time. And the idea that there might be a universal micro expression that's like 0.4 to whatever seconds that we can reliably enough to measure and make decisions, I think is kind of nuts, to be honest. Like, thinking about it from a scientific, biological, physiological perspective, and then knowing how complex our neurobiology is, and knowing also how incapable most humans are of communicating about their emotions, right? Like, how many times do you guys hear people our age especially say, like, I feel like, and then they go on to say something that is not at all a feeling? Like, we live in an age where I just don't think that this.
I think that, I mean, to me, it would make more sense that it's true than not. And again, this is from me coming from the perspective of somebody who has done some research and has not, is no expert in the field, but like, we are highly social creatures. And even before, like, if we're talking about the evolutionary split with apes, and before we developed even the ability to speak, how are we communicating? It was with our faces, our arms, our whatever, what have you. And it would make sense to me why there would end up being a disconnect between like the language piece of it and explaining the emotions, uh, yet the facial expressions and the body language would be more predictive, because of this, like, kind of, we've touched on it a bit in the past, but this idea that, I mean, language kind of emerged later on in our evolution, and that, like, what's more core to us is body language.
Yeah, I appreciate you positing that, and I completely wholeheartedly disagree, because I think people today are more disconnected from their emotional reality than they ever have been in all of human history, because more than ever we're engaged with screens and not people. And so to think that in a highly technical age that where we are, I would argue, this is not backed up by research, this very next statement, more disconnected with our emotional intelligence than ever before in human history. We are not capable of showing our emotion and like reading emotion in a way that could be systematized. And so then to understand that we are trying to do that, and we are using it in like US Transportation Security Administration to not allow people to fly or to flag certain people, and knowing that that's just baked with biases and our inability to emotionally like understand and empathize with people, I think that's extremely concerning. And I don't think it's science, and I don't think it's very evolutionarily founded, because of how disconnected we are today as a society. And now we're just in philosophy land, right? Like, this is backed by, I mean, some of my research, of course, but I think it's exceptionally concerning to think that we can decide anything beyond just maybe positive and negative. And certainly, like, anyone who's having a bad day in an airport should not be flagged by TSA, right? Like, how many of you guys have had a bad day in an airport? You're traveling, you have a bad day, like, you're carrying crap around and there's people, and so I just think it's way more complicated.
To me, I feel like
I think it's way more complicated. Now I'm catching myself.
So to me, what I heard seems like two different problems, but because there's a problem with one, it's casting the baby out with the bathwater. Like, to me, the idea that there is a problem with using it in these predictive analytics space of using it to make these decisions, like, I think that's a problem. But I don't think that doesn't mean that there is no capacity or like truth to the idea that we can categorize people's facial expressions, and tie that to emotion. Like, I think that can be true, yet the like use of it in an airport is still problematic, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I still disagree, but it makes sense. Like
Okay.
you're saying that argument A is like, can this be systematized? Argument B is, should the system be used to like flag people's travel? And you're saying like, no, I think there's problems here, but for argument A, like, yeah, I think there should be, or there is universal emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do disagree with both though.
Okay.
So you disagree that there's universal emotion?
I disagree that we can use facial expression to understand or create a system for universal emotion. That's like maybe more than 50% accurate. I mean, I think like, it can be done, sure, for maybe 50% of people accurately. And so does it mean anything? I don't know. I mean, I don't, that's kind of my thought. And it's like, if it's 50% accurate, and for all you comment scientists, we in science a lot of times we throw around like a confidence interval. We want it to be 95% accurate with a 5% like range where it could be incorrect, and 50% is generally not enough for something to be considered scientifically founded. And these numbers are arbitrary. Like, but I think that it doesn't make sense then if it's only accurate for so many people to use at all or to be a theory.
Okay, I kind of see what you're talking about, I think, and I kind of agree with you. Like, I think the highest number I saw that someone could be trained to say this micro expression means this, and they were correct in deducing what that meant. I think the highest number was like 73% or something, which is, I mean, it's above 50%, but it's not
Right.
like crazy high. It's like I don't know, like you have a pretty high chance of being wrong, 27% chance of being wrong. And I think, kind of to your point, and definitely Aiden's point, the big issue is definitely like the TSA stuff and the criminal stuff. Like to try to do that at this stage in the game, and maybe at any stage in the game, no matter how accurate it gets, is like pretty wild. And I mean, and then you can get into like lie detector tests with like when they're measuring your sweat and your electricity levels, and they're
Yeah.
measuring like how often your eyebrows furrow and this and that. It's like, what? Like, hold on. Like,
Yeah.
you can be, like you said, you can have a bad day, a bad day at the airport. You're probably gonna be having a bad day if you're being interrogated by the FBI. So you're
Right.
probably having a bad day. So I don't know how much evidence you can glean from that.
Mm-hmm.
Nevertheless, I'm still kind of confused. So do you think that? So let's just take body language, not micro expressions,
Mm-hmm.
but things such as like touching your neck or like playing with your hair or something of that nature when you're nervous. Are you saying that we don't know if that means someone's nervous, or you mostly focus on micro expressions?
I'm mostly focused on micro expressions, like specifically using facial expressions to determine a universal understanding of emotion, because I think we're really out of touch with like our emotional expression and what we're actually feeling and experiencing.
So even if it's a facial expression, that's not a micro expression
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
because we're so
Like
emotionally
how,
out of touch.
yeah, for example, like I'm sure many of you have heard of the term resting sad face for or RBF. Uh, and maybe it's something that women experience more, and like you laugh, but for the amount of times in my life that I've been told that I should smile more, or like that I should something more or less because people would take me more or less seriously, like has taught me to believe that whatever facial expression I have been giving off, it was not the right one for the situation. So for someone to say then, like, oh, Lauren, you must be feeling this today, which has happened in my life where they're like, man, Lauren, you must be feeling crappy today. And I'm like, actually, no, I'm doing really good. Like, I had an awesome morning. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And I think that's where my concern is. I think there are, of course, times where, like, without a doubt, right now, you can tell, like, man, I'm enjoying myself. I love conversation. I love common science. There are other times you've probably seen on the cast where like, ooh, she's not enjoying this conversation. It's a tough one, but for as many times as there are, there've got to be 100 more moments in a 24-hour day that I am absolutely not showing on my face what I'm feeling.
Okay. Interesting. What's making you make the um I mean, you said it's not found or anything, it's just kind of your understanding of humanity in this time. What's making you make the claim that this is like the most high touch we've been, as opposed to 100 years ago, 500 years ago, 10,000 years ago?
I think that my reasoning behind that, or I would say my reasoning behind that, is because I do know that our technological like innovations and the amount of technology integration into people's lives is at a higher level now than it ever has been. And while I think technology does a good job, and over the pandemic and since COVID-19, it's done a better job at allowing there to be interpersonal communication, I think still that there is no equivalent to face communication. And because I know that it's been so supplemented in today's world, we live in a world where it's much less tribal, where people are in their own, especially in the US, in their own homes, in their own spaces. And you read about, I mean, elderly populations being isolated and like dying because of isolation. And like there are studies on things like this. And so all of that informs my perception that we have got to live in one of the most like emotionally disconnected times in human history. But it's a big, obviously it's a huge claim.
So, I mean, I would agree with you that we live in an emotionally disconnected time period. Like I think of a kid who might grow up and play video games, like online or offline, and then struggle reading body language in person. But like there's still, I mean, so to give some credence in my research, like they were purported to be, I mean, blind people who would still express these different emotions. And to me, it seems like the argument that is being made is that this is something that is completely learned, and there are no innate aspects of our facial expressions of our emotions.
Yeah.
And I don't think that that's true. I think that it's definitely learned to an extent, and then it's definitely nature as well to an extent. Like I think like we could be living in one of the most emotionally disconnected times, so our learned capacity for expression of emotion is crap, and thus like our overall capacity to express is lower, but there's still some innate
I mean, I absolutely
expression of our emotions.
I absolutely agree. And I think the question is not, can a blind person have a facial expression that we would understand as joy, disgust, fear? Of course. The question is, can we measure the blind person's facial expression for 24 hours in a day and reliably be able to tell what that facial expression is showing of that person emotionally over 50% of the time? I think the answer's got to be no. And the reason that I'm focusing on this 24-hour period is because, like, the next jump is, well, if it's reliable in these studied environments, then the next step is like video surveillance, right? Which is 24-hour long. And we don't like when someone's going through an airport, and I know they're two different arguments, but I think they're really closely tied. Like, you don't ask someone a question at TSA in a controlled environment, like in a research environment where like maybe, I don't know exactly what the studies look like, but maybe they're shown an image or something and then there's a reaction to that image. Well, that's just not how life really works, right? And so if the question is like, is this founded science? And in my mind, founded science would be like, oh, that's something we can use to study or better our lives or whatever. I would say probably no. Like, I don't think it would be reliable enough for there to be something that we could systematize. I do for sure think that blind people can show joy, right? Like that's not the argument. The argument is if we measure it throughout a period in a day, like what would the accuracy be? It's got to be so low. And like a study like that would be really hard to do, and I don't know if it's been done.
Yeah, in my eyes, it's just a problem of data. Like if you could get a data set where there are photographs or videos of an emotion and it is in fact matched up to that emotion, like a happy smiley face, and you know that it is indeed happiness, which is hard because either the person themselves who the photograph was taken of would need to identify it as happiness, or the researcher is subjectively identifying the photo as happiness. But like in my mind, if there were a data set where happiness was matched to, like a photo of happiness was matched to like happiness as an emotion and so on and so forth, there could be uh, it could be a robust predictive tool for whatever. And I mean, as you point out, there's a lot of potentially bad uses of that. And here's a quote that I think just illustrates what we've been talking back and forth about, and it's from the 2015 sci-fi thriller Ex Machina. And Ava, an artificially intelligent humanoid, surprises the protagonist, Caleb, in their first meeting when she tells him, "Your microexpressions are telegraphing discomfort." And so it's this AI robot who says to the protagonist, "Your microexpressions are giving away discomfort." And I think that that's kind of the issue that, I mean, Lauren and we all are in agreement of, is like looking forward and seeing like, oh, if no matter how, even if the system is accurate or not accurate, like this system of categorizing emotions based on photographs, like even if it is accurate, it could still be used for, like, it could still be abused. And even if it is like only 50% accurate, it could still be abused. And so like regardless of that point, like there's still this I think feeling of like fear of having somebody else identify our own emotions. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is interesting. I mean, I did not see this coming. I did not know that was your opinion, Lauren, so that threw me off. But yeah, I mean, the huge issue in any of this is the repercussions or the conclusions that might come to it. Right? Again, the TSA stuff, lie detector stuff, people trying to incriminate people, and it's similar to how like there's a really famous psychological kind of breakdown of Bill Clinton talking about whether he did or did not have sexual relations with that woman. And he says, I believe this is how it goes. He says, "I did not have sexual relations with that woman." And then he says her name. And I can't remember her name off the top of my head right now. But so there's a couple different things. So it's like psychologists have said that similar to with microexpressions, they said with this percentage, I don't know what the percentage is, but 70% percentage, if you, since our natural speech is to use contractions like didn't, can't, wouldn't, instead of would not, since our natural pattern of speech is use contractions, if somebody is using not contractions or saying did not, could not, there's a good chance that they're lying. Similar to like the idea that when you add too many extra details into a story, you're probably lying. So it's like you're like adding things. And then he also like paused, which was like apparently another sign. And the fact that he said your or like that woman and then said her name is like an act of distancing. He's trying to distance himself from the woman and kind of like depersonalize, dehumanize it, and say like I don't have anything to do with that woman, that thing, that not us, not me, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's like the danger is that was Bill Clinton guilty? Under our social contract of not doing that? Yes, he was. And so in that instance, it's like, oh yeah, we can do that. But how many scenarios, to Lauren's point, how many times can you do that and be right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's very dangerous to say, oh, we're going to be right this many times, and then try to say that this is some sort of science that we can base a legal system or this big deal or this big kind of institution, organization, or act, movement, whatever,
Or
off
robots,
of,
hon.
or
Right.
robots. So like I think I'm of the opinion that capital punishment is wrong because there's like a small percentage of time that you sentence an innocent person to prison and to death. And to me, it just has to be one person to abolish the whole system. Because the fact that you could end an innocent person's life with capital punishment is such a big risk that you should never risk it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of how I see this conversation is that because, and it's a way bigger percentage of capital punishment, it's 27% or whatever, it's 50, it might be 50%. The fact that you could be 50, 20, 30, 15% wrong, and you're trying to make TSA spying, and I know they have like sort of face recognition stuff in China, and they talk about doing it in the US and this stuff, just in the streets and whatever. The risk of that is so huge that there should definitely be a huge pushback against it, no matter, even if the microexpression stuff got up to 95% accuracy.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to just also say I do think there could be value and is value in facial recognition software.
Mm-hmm.
I just think human emotions are so complicated that using microexpressions as like a term that means, oh, these expressions reflect these emotions. Like I think as long as that's tied to an emotional state, using any of that is not okay. Like, because I mean, even in Aidan and my relationship, and Aidan, I'm gonna not throw you under the bus, but just be honest. Like, there are many times I ask you what you're feeling, or we'll have a tough conversation, and like you don't even know what you're feeling. And I've been in many hard conversations where I don't even know what I'm feeling, right? And so to think that what my face shows at any given moment could be used in any way ever, I think is absolutely unscientific, because not only do we not always know what our emotions are, but they are ever evolving. And so if in one moment you're feeling disgust, or I mean, the very next you could be remembering some super happy thing. And I mean, if ever that's used in any moment, right? Like, and especially in something like TSA or anything like that, I do not think that that is scientific. I also don't think it's moral. But I do think that facial recognition software is going to be a big part of our future.
It's, I mean, a big part of today.
Mm-hmm.
I think so. Yeah, I would say that I think the emotional thing can be like emotions can be studied in a scientific manner. From my perspective, I do think that it is unethical, though. I mean, just when the cost of error is so large, like Dre, what you were talking about the capital punishment, and then the facial recognition software, if that's used to incriminate somebody who might have been innocent. I think so. There was one, I'm trying to remember who it was, but it was a technologist, and they were talking about when is an ethical time to use a tool such as machine learning. And the general gist of what they were saying was that it should be when the costs of error are low. And it's just echoing what you guys were talking about. Like, oh, maybe we can use it in our photos to figure out which photos have a picture of me in them, because if there's a mistake, well, okay, I just say that it wasn't me,
Yeah,
right?
right.
It's these instances where it is super helpful to our lives, but
Hmm.
the cost of an error is not human life or time behind bars or whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the, I don't know, it is tough. Emotions are really complex, and like social interactions are pretty complex. I think one of the issues with this field of study and potentially the encouragement of it, and even like the pop culture excitement about it, because there is an excitement about microexpressions or like body language in general, and it's usually, I feel like it is under the under the scope of either lie detection or like sales or like romantic endeavors. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
how do you know if she's into you, or how do you know if he's lying, or,
Yeah,
and it's just like, well,
it's in
those.
a manipulative.
Right.
Yeah,
And it's just like, I don't know. I don't know if that sort of psychology hack is good for humanity.
Mm-hmm.
But it like but you could use it in the sympathy way, right? If I ask
hmm
one of you if you're okay, and you say yes, but I deduce, so I surmise a micro expression, then it's like,
yeah,
oh, like now I can press and I can say,
Mm-hmm.
hey, like seriously, right? But so in that instance, in a sympathetic way, and like some of my research got me into like mirroring and motor mimicry and all that type of stuff, where subconsciously you start doing the same things, even if they're micro expressions. If your brain is deducing, even subconsciously, that they're giving off these symbols or these signals, you can start also doing it, and
Mm-hmm.
then
hmm
trying to like match it and synchronize with them. That's part of being a gregarious species, right? We're trying to blend together and like be one moving thing, kind of like a school of fish. So that part, I think, with the sympathetic, empathetic way, that's noble and that would be exciting. But I just don't. I don't know. It is kind of a risky field, and I think for some people who are on maybe more of the analytical spectrum, where we might not be as emotional, we might not express our emotions as much, we
hmm
might miss people's emotions quite a bit, and that's one of the things about this field that does really interest me. Is that I know there are people whose EQs are really high, who are really good at reading facial expressions. I'm not like, and
yeah,
to your point, I'm not saying 90%, but just like, and less than, because
Mm-hmm.
like when it comes to micro expressions, there's definitely an idea of like something being suppressed, right? You might not be trying to suppress or repress anything, but whatever expression's coming out is not the expression you mean to come out. And it doesn't have to be
Right.
like in a sneaky way, like, oh, I'm really lying.
Right.
But it could just be
right,
like whatever, there's emotion inside you that you're not trying to express it in this way.
Right.
right,
And
Front stage, backstage.
right, right. But like people with high EQs or people who are just attuned to these things, they might be able to sense any sort of like, maybe it's even just in the voice, maybe it's
Mm-hmm.
in the body language. It doesn't have to be a
yeah,
microexpression. It's any sort of facial, physical, whatever. They can feel it. Or it could, maybe it's even energy or
Mm-hmm.
electricity or something. They can feel it and they can sympathize. Whereas I'm somebody who's way more analytical. I don't care for eye contact that much. I don't need to look at people when I'm talking to them. I can have a whole conversation shoulder to shoulder, right? And I know it's kind of like a guy thing, but I think even I'm farther on the spectrum than that too, where it's like I know a lot of times I'll be like talking in the other room and then Em will like run in and like talk to me and I'm like, you didn't have to come in here and like look me in the eyes to talk. Like we were perfectly fine, like having the conversation in different rooms. But so I'm just not
yeah.
very interested in looking at people's faces when I talk to them. Not, I am because I'm human, but like not as some other people might be, where they really like eye contact,
Oh
they
yeah,
really like face to
Mm-hmm.
face. And my guess is that's kind of like like a cycle where it's like maybe I don't read as much into people's facial expressions. Therefore, I don't like to look at people's faces as much. And since I don't like to look at people's faces, then I don't read as much. Right? It's like a cycle.
Yeah.
But so in that situation, like I would be interested in studying it so that I can sympathize with people more and like not
sure.
make faux
Mm-hmm.
pas and not like sometimes I'll be talking and I won't realize like, oh, it's like what I'm saying is actually offending somebody, and I'll just keep going, and then all of a sudden it blows up and I'm like, oh, my bad, like I didn't read the situation well enough.
Yeah.
And that happens, and I would like for that to happen less,
Yeah.
which is like that's more of an innocent version of this.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of it is, I think, is like you said, really manipulative research. Not the research, but like
Right.
applications of it.
Applications, yeah.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I agree in the sense that wanting to train yourself to have a higher, like, emotional intelligence and a higher understanding of other people and other people's expressions is a very honorable goal. And I do think that with even some of the research that exists now, you can work on that, because my argument is of course not that there is no universal emotion. I think emotion is for sure shared because we all are enjoying the human experience. The worry for me is that reliably measuring it over time is likely extremely challenging.
Mm-hmm.
And I think even in the research settings that have been measured, there is data that shows that, you know, at least in the study you read, like 73 or whatever percent can be reliably measured. And so using that data to learn to have a higher emotional intelligence, I think that's totally honorable. I think, yeah, my maybe extreme, but maybe not so extreme position just comes from, I think, yeah, a lot of the uses that are currently happening today. For example, in many states in the West, your facial emotion is and can be used to form part of a fair trial. As the U.S. Supreme Court Judge Anthony Kennedy wrote in 1992, doing so is necessary to, quote, know the heart and mind of the offender. And, like, that to me, super concerning. Like, and then the TSA, the program is called SPOT, S-P-O-T, Screening Passengers by Observation Techniques. And it's created on and taught to personnel on how to monitor passengers for dozens of potentially suspicious signs that can indicate stress, deception, or fear. Like, for me, emotions that I most mixed up in, like, the microexpressions tests. And then finally, the last thing that I would mention is that there are even whole institutes who agree, at least with my position right now. The AI Now Institute, a research center at New York University, who I think also has a documentary or two out there, has even called for a ban on uses of emotion recognition technology in any sensitive situations, such as recruitment or law enforcement. So
Sorry.
Yeah, just let me.
Yeah, I'll let you finish.
So just like those instances and pieces of this story are where I get quite passionate. But like you said, I mean, you could use the research that's already existing that is quite accurate, right? Like 70% or whatever in a controlled environment to learn.
Yeah, and then, like, give me 1 second, and then, like, what Aidan said, too, it's kind of like the low risk thing, because if I'm using it to sympathize with someone and I'm wrong, it's not a big deal. It's like, okay, like, whatever. Right. But if I'm using it to incriminate somebody or think, oh, you're lying to me, ooh, like, now that's a big deal. Right? So, yeah, very interesting.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Aidan.
I just wanted, I was sitting on the edge of my seat. There was a fun application I came across that brings up the empathizing with others. So there was, I think in the Netherlands, a couple of researchers trying to use facial recognition software to identify the emotional state of pigs and try to improve their conditions. Again, also highly subjective. Who knows how accurate it might be. But maybe using facial recognition software to figure out how these pigs are doing over time. It's totally wild.
That is really interesting. This whole topic, and specifically what you just read, Lauren, is I'm interested in doing like a future podcast on a couple different ideas, like the right word wouldn't be antiquated, but antiquated laws or antiquated practices would go into it. But even with that one, just like that's obviously an example where possibly science has gotten like let us in. Obviously, it's not science in and of itself, but it's like the application of science is kind of like slow your roll. Like it's not. We're not there yet, and we don't need morality needs to step in and be like. And I don't even know if we ever should get there.
Right.
But there's a lot of laws and a lot of rules and a lot of things. Like for example. Like eyewitness testimony is there's study after study that says this is not reliable. Like humans are not reliable to like I don't know these really hyper emotional situations where these things happen fast and there's this and there's that and blah blah and then you retell a story and someone else is telling a story and it's like there's all the stuff that goes on that's like we should not be using eyewitness testimonies and there was a whole like witch hunt for these pedophiles that in the U.S. I can't remember when it was, like 20, 30 years ago, where a lot of these children were saying like they had been touched or this or that, something inappropriate happened. And then it came out, like all these studies came out and all these things came out, and it was like, oh no, like these children are being like pressed and suggested, right? And they're having these psychological influences, and they're being subconsciously or consciously like reinforced to give these answers that yes, somebody had inappropriately interacted with them, and it turned out it's like no, like yes, that happens, but a lot of these cases were not right.
Yeah.
It has been a fun conversation, a fascinating conversation, and I hope we revisit some areas that this could go, maybe more of the AI or more implications in policy and things. But I think I was fully expecting both of you to have like exactly the same opinion as me. I was so surprised that this ended up being a bit more of a back and forth. I was like, oh, there's no way they're going to think this is scientifically founded. I bet they read the same articles I read. That's what was in my head.
I was like, I'm about to be a micro-expressionist. It's like, you know, I was about to be the expert. I was about to be the best. I was about to, like, you know, sell all the cars, arrest all the people, sympathize with everybody who said.
Pick up all the ladies.
Yeah, pick up all the ladies with the body language and the subtle hints. I was doing it all.
Oh, man.
You really ended my dreams.
Well, Common Scientists, thanks so much for tuning in this week. Of course, you can smash the subscribe button and visit our website, commonscientists.com, and get out there and ask some questions in your daily life. I hope this pushed you to think a little bit about your facial expressions and how those might or might not be tied to your emotion, and maybe how that also is affecting our day-to-day lives in already enacted policies, and how we can advocate for ourselves as common scientists to find what feels good in the future.
Hey Common Scientists, hope you enjoyed the cast. Thanks for investing in common science. We hope it brought as much value to you as it did to us.
To learn more, smash the subscribe button and visit our website, commonscientists.com, where you can read our blog, join our email newsletter, and follow us on social media.
Finally, if you like what we have to say, you can absolutely support us on Patreon. We could always use more support. You can navigate there also from our website, commonscientists.com, common scientists with an S, so that we can continue cultivating a community of common scientists.